So, new console, new Mario Kart, and both have hit the ground running. Mario Kart World and its open world have been a hit so far, selling over 5.5 million copies in just its first couple months. Yet despite that, you've probably seen people express frustration about the game lately, or even been one of those people. Yeah, this bold new direction for Mario Kart has stumbled into controversies that have soured the experience for some players. There are a lot of knee-jerk reactions and hot takes online, so let's try and get a clearer idea of what's going on here. Because not only do I think this delayed criticism was always going to happen, I think it'll actually help Mario Kart grow into something better in the long run. To understand how we got into this predicament, we need some context, starting with where the previous game ended up. To say Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was a big deal is an understatement. The single best-selling game on one of the best-selling consoles ever. It had engaging and, mostly, balanced gameplay, a signature aesthetic style with the themes of a major sports broadcast, and, by the end, a huge list of playable drivers and racetracks. Truly the pinnacle of everything Mario Kart had done up to that point. And the dev team knew it. Thanks to some interviews officially released a while back, we know the developers themselves believe they'd perfected the current formula. Which raised the question, what the hell can we do for the next game? They couldn't just stick to what they had and build atop it ad infinitum. They knew the more you keep recycling the same ideas, the less interesting they get. Especially when they just watched New Super Mario Bros. Make that mistake. The games weren't bad, but each sequel played it so safe that fans got burnt out by the fourth one. The devs, the fans, everyone knew it was time for Mario Kart to grow and evolve. Exactly how was a topic of many debates. A popular fan idea was to take the crossover content MK8's original DLC dabbled in and go all in on it. But instead, the devs had something ambitious planned. Something they'd need a generational upgrade to be able to pull off. We all had our guesses for what they'd do, but hardly anyone thought open world would be the answer. Gone were the isolated racetracks of the past. Now every one of them was a landmark in a grand, interconnected Mario Kart world. See what I did there? Yeah, moving on. Instead of fast traveling off screen to each leg of a Grand Prix, you physically drove to there as part of the race itself. And with 24 players per race, twice as many as we'd ever seen before, that trip would be as chaotic and occasionally rage-inducing as ever. Even beyond the obvious, the game has this conscious effort to refresh everything. A massively expanded roster includes a wave of so-called NPC drivers we'd never seen in Mario Kart before, and most returning drivers have a bunch of alternate costumes. In place of Mario Kart 8's anti-grav segments, new rail grinding and wall riding mechanics let players scope out alternate paths and potentially create their own shortcuts anywhere if they have a sharp eye. Seriously, we're still learning how much depth there is here. And the returning retro tracks got total visual overhauls, with most completely repurposed and recontextualized. Dino Jungle went from generic prehistoric zone to high-tech facilities straight out of Jurassic Park. DK Pass upgraded from simple mountain path to full-on ski resort. Guess the big guy really likes alpine sports. Even straighter remakes got a fresh coat of paint, like Airship Fortress being decked out to look more like an actual military base undergoing combat exercises, or Sky High Sunday taking full advantage of the new mechanics to create multiple intersecting paths at all times, turning a track hardly anyone cared about originally into something actually pretty good. Even the art direction is doing something brand new. Those interviews from earlier pointed out that where Mario Kart 8 was trying to look sleek and cutting edge, Mario Kart World wanted to look more playful and expressive. Based on all the crazy expressions and how much the karts bounce around during gameplay, I think it worked. And tying it all together are the game-wide motifs of a road trip. Designs throughout are inspired by roadmaps, signs, and postcards. The new racetracks almost all feel like tourist destinations. A big city, an oceanside resort, a mountaintop observatory with a breathtaking view, or at least somewhere interesting worth stopping by to look around and get a bite to eat. Which, of course, ties right into the new free roam mode, letting players drop in, get behind the wheel, and cruise around wherever their hearts desire. That's all fine and good, right? So what's the problem? You see, there's a trend with games that reinvent their series formulas, at least the ones that start out with a lot of fan support. Right at launch, everything is fresh and new and amazing. But once the novelty wears off, the needle moves in the opposite direction, and people start getting very critical of the new stuff. Well, the difficulty is inconsistent. The most challenging racetracks are all over the place instead of all near the end. Well, the CPUs adapt how well they play a little too much to how you're driving and how much advanced tech you're using. Well, a few of the new tracks fall short of the usual quality. Starview Peak and Boost Cinema feel like they're a little too short and don't utilize their themes as much as they could have. Well, Free Roam may have optional missions to complete and collectibles to find, but there's little way to track what you've already done, and it pales in comparison to the full-on adventure mode some were hoping for once we found out about the open world. But the biggest point of contention has been the structure of the races, particularly how hard they focus on the routes between the racetracks. While the routes aren't a bad idea, they have fewer turns, fewer set pieces, and just aren't as interesting as the main tracks themselves, which was a problem when so much of the gameplay defaulted to driving on routes from one track to the next, then only going one lap around the track once you got there. As time went on, a segment of players online found out that picking the random option when selecting a track almost always gave you a standalone 3-lap race with no preceding route at all, and started picking exclusively that to get the old school experience they were starting to miss. Until an update about a month after release changed that. Now, selecting random had a greater chance than before of picking a route race to one of the already selectable tracks nearby, and a lower chance of a 3-lap race somewhere else. In case you haven't heard because you were out on a real-life road trip, there was backlash. Vocal reactions blew up everywhere, quickly spiraling out of control as the internet always does. Some mistakenly believed that classic 3-lap races couldn't happen at all anymore if you picked random, leading to countless YouTube videos accusing Nintendo of ruining the game by forcing everyone to play one specific way instead of letting fans create their own fun. Not naming names, but you've probably seen the thumbnails. The thing is, it's more complicated than that, and at the risk of making myself the target of every red shell in the nearest zip code, I can kind of see both sides here. On one hand, I totally get why there are players who want the classic style to be available. I don't think they're rejecting the new gameplay or refusing to change. If that was true, then Knockout Tour, the mode raced almost exclusively on routes, wouldn't be so popular. I think most players, the ones who aren't jumping to conclusions, believe the routes are fine, they just want the option to stick to the more interesting core racetracks when they want a more classic experience, and are using the best method they have available to do that. Having an update nerf that method for a while, it made them, well, frustrated. On the other hand, I think I see why the developers might have made a change like that at first. Imagine wanting to introduce new ideas to a series that has played it safe for a while, wanting to move it forward, only to watch a whole segment of the player base refuse to engage with those new ideas for some reason. Worse yet, there were casual players going online wanting to try out the newer style, and here were all these other players forcing them to play specifically how the old games played. So the devs tried to encourage everyone to give the new style a fair chance, and in typical Nintendo fashion, did it in very overprotective fashion and didn't read the room very well. But here's the thing. All of this discourse, it's happened with Mario Kart several times before. This series has been part of most of our childhoods in some way, shape, or form. Each of us have our favorite versions of Mario Kart from when we were growing up, whether from hanging out after school huddled around a GameCube and a TV, going online with a 3DS and racing with opponents worldwide, or everything in between. But you know those formative games we're so nostalgic for? They got criticized too. Mario Kart Double Dash has plenty of fans for its unique setup of 2 characters per kart, but it also has plenty of issues, like the janky physics that make controlling your kart harder than it should be, or how many kart stats are not accurately displayed on the select screen, making them behave much differently than the game says they should, or the poor balancing that made certain characters much better than others based on what their signature exclusive item was, or the weird item mechanics in general that made it harder to defend yourself from all the chaos. And if you got hit hard, you couldn't use any items at all for several seconds if they weren't knocked out of your hands outright. This was also the game where the blue shell was its most punishing, and the first where it only affected first place, making it a giant middle finger to the leader and a marginal help at best for the player who actually threw it. Other games have been nitpicked as well. Mario Kart DS's online play was so dominated by an advanced technique that how well you placed often revolved entirely around how well you could do it. If you know any Mario Kart veterans, ask them how they feel about snaking. Mario Kart Wii's game balance was an utter mess, with bikes and their wheelies blatantly better than karts, and specific characters outclassing the rest of their weight classes thanks to inherently higher top speed and/or mini-turbo. Mario Kart 7 got a lot of flack for its own roster because of how small it was, only 16 characters compared to Wii's 24, and how many big names were absent, including Waluigi, despite his track being in the game. Every past Mario Kart has players who remember it fondly, but every past Mario Kart also has flaws that we don't talk about as much anymore. And would you believe me if I said the game's seeing so much nostalgia right now caught just as much backlash originally? Let's flash back to May of 2014. The Wii U had been out for a year and a half at that point, and sales had slowed down drastically. It had a few good games. Super Mario 3D World came out 6 months prior to massive acclaim, but it wasn't moving consoles. Nintendo needed a surefire hit to turn the Wii U's fortunes around, and they were hoping Mario Kart 8 was going to do that. A game with a gravity-defying gimmick hoping to be bigger, more elaborate, more visually stunning and eye-catching than the series had ever been. And once that release date came, the game saw mostly good reviews, but it didn't take long for players, fans, and onlookers in general to find things to criticize. The new anti-grav sections were neat, but half the time they felt less like a revolutionary new idea and more like a simple gimmick. The new racetracks had some cool ideas, but also some that just didn't work, especially, of all things, the new Rainbow Road, which just didn't have the sense of finality its predecessors always embodied. Item play felt too stifled. Not being able to hold a second item while dragging one behind you meant there were fewer ways to shake up a race. And if you were in the lead and got a coin from a box and the people behind you didn't, you were just screwed. The starting roster of drivers left a lot to be desired. Fans were not happy about how many Koopalings, Babies, and Metal clones there were when several fan favorites like Diddy Kong, Bowser Jr., and King Boo were MIA. And when you went online, you hardly ever saw most of the roster that was there. Early balancing was so off that it didn't take long for high-level races to feature Morton and not much else. Even then, newer players hardly stood a chance because, once again, an advanced technique caused the entire online meta to revolve around its existence. If you know any Mario Kart veterans, ask them how they feel about fire hopping. And for casual fans, there wasn't as much to do as usual, because battle mode was hardly a mode at all, just roaming around some of the regular racetracks, hoping to run into someone. It took time for Mario Kart 8 to work out its rough spots. First came the original DLC, a mix of old and new content that brought some new ideas and new faces to the game, while starting some much-needed balance patches. Development after that moved over to the Switch port, which took advantage of being a re-release by further shaking up the game balance, adding a second item slot for more strategy, and occasionally more chaos, and adding content the original version was sorely missing, like an actual battle mode. Even then, though, there were still issues. Some characters were still missing, and the meta eventually stagnated again, this time revolving around Waluigi riding the Wild Wiggler, which got another shakeup years later with the Booster Course Pass, except that itself met mixed opinions at first. A bunch of returning retro courses only kind of helped scratch the itch Mario Kart fans were having for a new game when it had already been so long since 8's original launch. Was this really going to be the only truly new Mario Kart the Switch got? And since everything in the first wave was ported over from the mobile spin-off, the texture work was so simplistic it made for a jarring style clash compared to the rest of the game. And yet, as more waves released and more updates were made, reception to the DLC turned around. More fan-favorite tracks showed up, the aesthetics took a step up to be much closer to the base game, and we even got a handful of drivers added by the end, including one who finally got behind the wheel after getting snubbed way back in '64. Sure, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is oft considered the peak of the series now, but it didn't start out that way. It took a while for the game to reach that peak, and for that to happen, it had to address the problems that came up over time. When any series shakes up its formula, it can take a while to figure out how to grow into the new stuff. A historic example being all the series that went from 2D to 3D in the late 90s. Sometimes there are parts of a game that turn out to be serious problems, blemishes on an otherwise incredible experience, like having to open the menu dozens of times to put on or take off the damn iron boots to get around the water temple. And sometimes a serious flaw can come up that wasn't apparent at first. Sometimes in collectathons, there can be too much of a good thing. These kinds of growing pains just naturally happen as the series tries to evolve. It used to take an entire new game, or expanded re-release, to fix issues like this. But now, post-launch updates let the devs address them faster and within the same game, which has its own pros and cons if they react too fast, and sometimes it causes unintended side effects that lead to more growing pains. For example, let's finally address the elephant in the room. A recent update partially reverted the RNG when selecting the random option. Now selecting random gets you 3-lap races at closer to the odds they were at before. However, the update also, among many other things, fiddled with item roll rates to make the coin box item appear more often, with an accidental side effect of making drivers in first place who grab a double box sometimes get a regular coin and a coin box, leaving them utterly defenseless through nothing but a bad roll, just like in the Wii U version of Mario Kart 8. More growing pains. I know there are people who don't like it when devs rely on fixing stuff in post-launch patches. We've seen some developers abuse that by rushing out an only barely finished product and worrying about the mountain of bugs afterward, if at all. But as a creator myself, sometimes you just don't know how well something will go over. You can do your due diligence, research as best you can, get an idea of how your audience might react, but you never know for sure. If I had to guess, I think the team behind Mario Kart World didn't realize how badly a portion of the player base would still want classic 3-lap races to be consistently available. And I believe an update later on will add an online mode dedicated to 3-lap races. As unnecessarily ugly as the discourse has been, it brought up some valid points that I think will get addressed eventually. But the full fix will need time to code everything, test it, iron out the kinks, etc. We'll probably see it around the first wave of DLC they definitely have lined up. We know you're probably working on a big DK-themed expansion, guys. Or who knows, maybe they'll throw us a curveball, not like we predicted this game's big new thing in the first place. So yeah, Mario Kart World made a conscious effort to be different, to pave a new road so the series wouldn't become so derivative it lost its luster. The new creative choices have seen a lot of praise, but also some belated backlash toward problems that crept up after launch. And I think it's just a natural side effect of the series figuring out how to evolve. And we know the devs are trying to listen and trying to figure it out, even if it might take some time. Who knows, maybe we'll see changes down the road that fix the game's other issues. Maybe they'll add a checklist for P-Switch missions and Peach medallions, tucked away in a menu, so players who go into free roam to relax don't feel pressured to do everything. Maybe they'll adjust Kamek's transformations, so if you're playing offline, he's more likely to turn everyone into an NPC you haven't unlocked yet. And maybe they'll finally add a music player to free roam. Just let us enjoy individual parts of the astronomically good soundtrack while we cruise around, guys. This video might age well, or terribly. We'll see how it goes down the road. Hey, thanks to these people here for being my pit crew for this video, and especially my patrons for their continued support. My channel's mainly Smash Brothers related, but I've been reaching out to topics about other games until we finally get Smash news for the Switch too. How was this one? So, until next time, I'm starving. Want to go drive through Yoshi's and get a burger?